Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, and every week we bring you the stories of people who are making the world a little better. We do this to inspire the friends that we have around the globe. Our membership is actually global. We have no particular barriers in terms of time and space as an online and asynchronous club. And as part of Rotary International, that focus on service above self is something that brings us together with our particular club having an interest in innovation, education, and entrepreneurship. As you'll see today, the focus on how we see the educational and personal benefits of travel is something that I think is an interest shared by our members and our group of friends that follow the work we do. And we're excited to have this presentation. This presentation is from Afrah Abdullah. Afrah is a part of the community of the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley. She's actually at the moment stepped away to focus on her dissertation. She is working on her doctoral degree with the St. Mary's College of California. It took me a moment, but I got there. And she just completed her doctoral coursework in the last few months. So congratulations on that. What we're going to hear today is the focus of her dissertation, and we're excited to hear about how this proposal works and that she is on her way to defending it in the coming year. Afra, we are so happy to have you. The mic is yours. We are excited to hear about your work related to Senegal and the Gambia.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that warm intro. And thank you for those who are here today and who will watch the recording later. So I'll just jump right into this. So I am a doctoral candidate at this time with a very big interest in travel, particularly to Senegal and Gambia, West Africa. So in these slides, I'll just kind of take you on a journey through a pilot study that I've done and my proposed research for my dissertation. So the title, Senegambia, Sojourn, A Journey of Healing and Spiritual Transformation. I use the term Senegambia to cover the two regions of modern-day Senegal and Gambia, which were at a time one region traversed by different tribes of people. There's throughout Africa and different parts of the world, now nation state lines that were kind of drawn in. So you've got a distinct country of Senegal, French speaking, and Gambia, English speaking. But there was a time when the whole region was considered Senegambia. So I'll go over my problem, the purpose of my study, some of the research questions that I'm considering, the theoretical framework for the study, a review of literature. I won't get into all of the literature, but just some of the literature I'm finding around study abroad, heritage tourism, and then I'll get into the methodology of my study. And the pictures that you see throughout this presentation are pictures that my participants from the pilot study shared with me as some of their photos and footage, archival artifacts from their visit to Senegal and Gambia, which happened in January of this year, 2024. So as far as the problem that I'm seeing, one of the major problems is kind of an erasure of history. Oftentimes when we're learning history, whether it's in school, K through 12 education, or even higher education, much of Black history or African history has been ignored, dismissed, silenced, or sometimes erased altogether. There's so much of Africa and the African diaspora that we just don't know. And as a result, we forget who we are. It's damaging for people to not have an accurate narration of who they are and where they come from. And particularly for African Americans whose lineage was disrupted by the transatlantic slave trade, there's major gaps in, well, who am I? And what language did I speak? And what kind of foods did I eat? And what kind of faith did I practice? And I want to fill in some of those gaps through taking people on these journeys to the ancestral motherland, if you will. So the purpose then is to get travelers to reconnect, to remember, and to restore a sense of worth and who they are. I've been working with a group called Bayan. They're a graduate school based in Chicago. And I did a pilot study with the group back in January, as I mentioned. And this gives you a little blurb about how the tour of Senegal and Gambia is laid out, some of what they'll see during the visit. And so I'll just read that off for you all. In the Senegambia tour, band travelers will visit a number of important heritage sites from the medieval period and into the early modern era, ranging from the pilgrimage city of Tuba, where the inspiring anti-colonial figure Ahmadou Bamba is buried, the environs of Kunta Kinte Island and Goree Island that factored in the horrendous transatlantic slave trade, and natural environments ranging from rivers, lakes, deserts, and coastal areas. So it's a combination of heritage travel, historic sites that might be a little bit painful in terms of the places people visit in a painful chapter of history. And there's some leisure and bonding and recreation and spiritual kind of immersion involved in the tour as well. And that picture there, you see just a statue reminding people never again. You can see that the statue has its arms raised and the chains are broken. So never again, meaning never again, chattel slavery, chains, human beings in chains. So some of the research questions that I'm interested in. So Senegal and Gambia are both majority Muslim countries, African Muslim countries. And a lot of times when people think of Muslims, they think more Middle East, less so Africa. But there's a very rich and long tradition of Islam in Africa, West Africa particularly, sub-Saharan Africa, that came by way of trade and scholarship and libraries of Timbuktu and places like this. So when Muslims in the West go to these kinds of lands, how do they engage their faith identity? That's one of the questions that I'm looking at. You go to sacred sites, and here's a man who's a African American Muslim from, I think, maybe Philadelphia or something, praying in a mosque in Gambia. So what's that experience like for someone who's learned his faith in a Western context? Another question that I'm looking at is these heritage sites, like slave sites. So we've got in the Gambia, Senegal, even some parts of along the coast, these ports that were the door of no return. So these were slave ports. This is where people are taken to the shore, and the expectation is that you're going through that door, you're on these slave ships sent to the New World, whether it's the Caribbean, Brazil, the Americas. There was no intention of ever returning, right? So years later, hundreds of years later, what is it like to have that lineage disrupted, but now you're going back through a place that you were not meant to return through? I'd like to dig into that a little bit more. The third question is about the shaping of cultural identity and faith identity. What I've been able to find in places like West Africa is that there's a very integrated identity, culture and faith and gender and all of these different aspects of who we are not separated. They're very integrated in places like Africa. I had one participant mention that it wasn't until she came to America that she felt very divided and separated. She never knew separation of gender and race and faith and anything, class, all of these things. Where she comes from in Ethiopia, all of these are very integrated, interwoven. So I want to look at what's the experience like for those of us who have grown up in the West in a kind of an individualistic culture, going into a very integrated we culture. What's that experience like? So all questions and all dissertations and literature reviews have to have a framework. So we have to look through a particular frame when reading the literature, a particular frame when asking the questions of participants when conducting the study. So I'm very much interested in cultural intelligence, which is defined as a fluid and successful navigation and adaptation of different cultural experiences and settings in such a way that is both natural and respectful of the present culture. Um, One of the things that I was finding in my literature is that travelers may go to different lands and have a bit of a cultural chauvinism. My and it may not even be apparent in them until they reach another land, and you might look down on, oh, this is how you do things, or uh this is the cultural norm here. Our way is better. So when stepping out of the comforts of the lands we come from and into other people's cultural frame, I I would I would expect people to have some cultural intelligence, or at least build that through these travel exchanges. Um, Another theoretical frame is cultural humility. And this is a concept that was born in kind of a medical arena, and that's why the definition goes into patient-physician dynamics. But in general, having a cultural humility is a kind of a commitment to learning and growing and understanding you don't know everything about people, about any particular topic. So it's a commitment to self-evaluation and self-critique and redressing power imbalances. So this can happen in the patient-physician setting, but I want to extend that into a traveler, study abroad, heritage tourism experience as well. Bring that into the study and into the travel. As far as my literature review, I'm seeing major things come up. These are two major things so far, and this is a work in progress. There's a Black identity transformation and development that happens through these kinds of travel for African Americans and other Africans of the diaspora. And then there's a healing that happens in these historic slave sites. It The healing might come through really powerful visceral reactions to standing in the footsteps of ancestors, but there's processing healing that happens being there, embraced by the people of that land. Um, these are just some supporting articles that where I pulled my literature and um, the methodology. So I'll kind of move through this quickly in the interest of time. My plan for my study is to make a qualitative participatory action research study in West Africa. Um, I would like my epistemology as constructivist paradigm that we make meaning through what's socially constructed. And I've included in here pictures of circles of learning in West Africa. And you can see just in the arrangement of the circle of learning, people sitting on the floor in a circle, it's meanings being constructed just through the exchange. And it's a circle and not sitting in rows, which differs very much from our Western classroom arrangements. There's a great respect for elders and very different ways of learning and ways of knowing. And I'll pull that epistemology into my study. My research design, I want to organize a tour to Senegal and Gambia and select 12 to 15 participants through conveyance sampling who will take this tour with me. And then I will collect data through interviews and photography and journaling and maybe some focus groups. All of these pictures, I hope you're enjoying them. These again were pulled from my pilot study, and it just shows the connections that were happening as these participants who already went to Senegal and Gambia, how they were interacting with just the children of West Africa. So after the trip, I'll do conduct interviews to see how it impacted the travelers. And then I will just do a data analysis and look at some of the phenomena that come out of this group of people having this powerful cultural exchange. These slides are just kind of technical things about uh, member checks and peer reviews that establish credibility of my study and reliability, and lots of references. And these are more pictures that came again out of the pilot study. And it's not it's the end of the slides, but the beginning, hopefully, of a very powerful journey and experience through Senegal and Gambia, which will be the basis of my dissertation. So I end it with saying, let's let the journey begin. Let's go to West Africa.
I love it. Afra, thank you so much for that presentation. What we'll do is we'll introduce the people who are part of the recording today. And Afra, I'll have you go ahead and stop sharing there so that we can let people kind of wave at the camera as we get into that space. Joining us from Southern California, Catalina Island, is a person who has spoken to our club, in the very recent past. That's Ernie Rodriguez of Nature in the Classroom. Ernie, good to see you. From our club, we have in San Francisco, greater San Francisco Bay Area, Christopher Major, and then also in Texas, we have Rory Olson in Houston. My name is Rushton Hurley. I'm in San Jose. And Afra, you're here in the Bay Area as well. So what a cool thing to focus on in terms of your work. Now, because this focuses on the power of travel to help people begin to see kind of possibilities in themselves, connections within themselves that they might not have fully understood before. Let's start by talking about the January trip from which we got all of those amazing photos. So was that your first time to that part of Africa?
So I actually didn't get a chance to go.
Ah,
So I in the pilot study, my intention was to go, but another little fun fact, in January, I delivered my second daughter. So she's now 6 months old, my little Fatima. So my intention was to go on that trip with these participants, but she was ready to arrive. That was my big change. So I've been to Morocco before, and I've been to Egypt, but I actually have not yet been to Senegal and Gambia. So I had to kind of go vicariously through my participants for this research. Yeah.
wow. All right.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, absolutely. Fatima's needs come first, and that makes perfect sense. Now, when talking to the participants from that trip, though, you talk about this in the context of your dissertation research, but also you talk about it on a very personal level, and I'm assuming they did as well. What were some of the things that they said about the trip that surprised you, and perhaps even redirected some of your thinking about your research?
All right. Yeah. Well, one participant um, said she gave me the idea about the erasure. So she was just surprised at how little she knew about Gambia and Senegal. She mentioned how she was en route to Gambia, sitting next to a person who was very well traveled, I think CEO of a philanthropic organization. She'd never heard of Gambia. So the just the I guess the cultural humility really that came out of like, how did I not know about this people, this land, this food, this culture, what's going on here? That was really personally moving for her. She said it was very striking to see Senegalese can be very, very tall, both the men and the women, like mountainous human beings, just in their physical appearance, very striking, very attractive, very compelling. So that was something that she just kind of like, oh, okay, what a beautiful people. Another participant made a point. She's Ethiopian American. She traveled to Ethiopia to go to a wedding with family. And then she went from Ethiopia which is East Africa, over to Gambia and Senegal, West Africa. And something she noticed was just a lot of similarity in the cultural as far as how people embrace you and want to feed you and bring just the welcome is endless. Welcome and music and warmth and hugs. But she said the coffee is not as good. She said we Ethiopians have the best coffee. And coffee originates there. West Africa has a lot of work to do just in terms of coffee. So though those little nuanced details were to me very interesting. And she said there's a distinction that needs to be made between um, immigrant African Americans in the US, that is, and African Americans who are descendants of that slave trade, who are very much removed from what particular land you come from, and language and people. Because the experience for her, she said she observed African American travelers at that door of no return weeping, just really, some to the point of shaking, because it was such a powerful something that came over them, stepping into the footsteps of those who've been through such trauma. So she said, I think you need to hone in on that. I think you need to give this a little extra time and care to dig into what that means. And the tour guide for that group actually made a focus group. He said, with respect for this moment, if those of you who are not directly tied to this kind of history, if you can give us a moment to just group together and process what's happening here, what came up for you, what emotions came up, let's create a little focus group just for that. So I thought, wow, that was powerful. So those things were, for me, very eye-opening. I said, how do I dig a little deeper? How do we heal? How do we bring this back to the US and make it a means of healing for everyone involved? Yeah, so those things were, for me as a, dissertator, just and a researcher, that more questions keep coming. And my goal is to see healing and unity and all those kinds of things. So my participants kind of share that. They're kind of paving the way for that.
Well, that joy and the complexity of learning is something that comes through in the story really well. When you talk about the distinction between the immigrant traveler and the traveler who is a descendant of someone who came across as part of the transatlantic slave trade, I would guess that one component of that erasure is the sense of historical figure and the inspiration that comes from that. So, so many people in different parts of the world look to powerful figures in their past as representing something important about who they are as a group. I think about, the people you mentioned in it. You mentioned Amhadu Bamba and Kunta Kinte. And of course, some people of a certain age will remember the Roots series and will know the name Kunta Kinte. But I think about others, like the Malian ruler Mansa Musa and the incredible economics lesson that is his
Yeah,
Hajj experience, right? And all of these things. Is there something about the way your research is developing that focuses in on special figures in history as a component of how people think about their connections and that sense of healing of trauma?
absolutely. Oh, beautifully stated. There was actually a book list and book reading that the travelers, they didn't, it was optional reading, but highly recommended by the faculty guide who was leading the tour, just to reorient people around expectations for who these key figures are that we don't know about. So Mansa Musa was definitely on that list. People did know about Roots. They were advised to watch it if they hadn't seen it, read some of the books, know who Kunta Kinte is. Ahmadou Bamba was a huge part of resisting colonialism. So people didn't know about this these brave key figures in relatively modern history. So some were dating back to 1600s or more, and others were 1800s, or early 1900s. So for many of the travelers, that was empowering. And as you said, when you look to people who represented something great or noble or empowered, it does increase the confidence and feelings of self-worth for people. Yeah, that was a big part of the trip and the pre-reading for the trip. Yeah.
So, there was that rather powerful quote from Mertens, I believe it was, the complex world of lived experience from the point of view of those who live with it, right?
Mhm, mhm,
And so when when we look at what it means to travel somewhere, and you mentioned that there was a reading list for the people who go, I mean, that surely fosters some of that humility that puts someone in a really good position to feel that joy of encountering something new and amazing and very, very different.
mhm. Absolutely.
As you look at that from your perspective as a doctoral researcher, is it the case that the people you are working with are also talking about similar experiences but in different parts of the world?
Absolutely. Oh yeah, absolutely. And with this same group that I traveled with, my elective travel before this trip, I went to Malaysia, I went to Spain, and in each place I've visited, I've kind of worn those lenses of the cultural humility. I'm coming here to learn. I don't know. The more you know, the more you know you don't know. And the connection of all of us across the globe is just, it's apparent wherever you go. We're all connected. We all have shared human experiences, shared struggles wherever we may be in the world, and making that connection, it 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 does something for, I think, increasing our global identity or increasing our humanity, increasing our love for service, I would say. Um, Another thing that they did before this trip was an orientation around setting intentions. There was intellectual prep and kind of a intentional prep. And the faculty guide mentioned that we're going to a land that might be materially impoverished. You might see things that you've never seen coming from the West. Um, but if you could challenge yourself to look past some of the material poverty and look to the richness of tradition or the amount of joy that you see in the faces of smiling children, though they may be barefoot, though they may be walking miles and miles to get clean water from a well, there's there still may be something to learn about their level of contentment in life and their joy and the lack of anxiety and stresses, what's one of the participants mentioned. Over She came into the land with the hard wiring of schedules and deadlines, and we keep to a certain time frame, and everything was running 2 to 3 hours behind schedule, and everybody was okay with it. Everyone had a pace of life that worked with the pace of life there. And she said it took about 3 days for her to say, I can chill. This is okay. These children are happy. People are smiling. People are offering things. So what is it about time and how we deal with time that's different? And what we think of wealth and poverty, you know, what does it all mean, right? In terms of our disposition. And she could feel kind of some of the stresses and anxieties of being stickler about time fading for the duration of the trip. So those connections definitely happen. And this was a very well-traveled person who was coming from Chicago. Another person was coming from Morocco. you it's it's amazing. Travel just brings out amazing epiphanies and human connections.
Absolutely. Your comments remind me of a presentation we had a few years ago from Dr. Ernesto Ciroli, whose message to Rotarians about service essentially came down to, I think the title of his talk was "Shut Up and Listen," right? And that speaks to the power of humility and especially the potential of service clubs to be able to think in terms of learning and serving by being open to the idea that what you thought would be the right thing just might not be, right? And I feel like your research is also pushing us in directions of the power of humility for effective service.
Mm.
So as we wind down the recording, I do want to make sure that we thank everybody who's joined us, but before I do that, let me just say thank you, Afra, for the sharing the work you're doing in the place where you are with it. It is a work in progress, and that humility to learn that comes from being able to say, here's what I'm experiencing, here's what I'm seeing is something I think a wonderful lesson for all of us. And thank you on that front. We'll come back to you for a final word in just a minute. All of you who joined this recording, either in person or watching it on our SiliconValleyRotary.com page or on our YouTube channel or listening to it as part of our podcast series, we thank you for taking your time. It is our excitement to be able to share the stories and voices of people from around the world and how they see possibilities for improving communities. And that is part of the excitement of being in Rotary generally and in the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley specifically, where our online and asynchronous format allows the flexibility of connecting and accessing stories in ways that we believe is quite special. So make sure you leave us a comment at the bottom of the page on our SiliconValleyRotary.com webpage for this week's meeting, and then also to let us know you were here using that attendance piece there. As we always like to do, we hand it back to our speaker for the final word. So, Afra, what would you like people to have clearly in mind as they finish watching the video or listening to the podcast?
I like to say, let's go to West Africa. Let's be people of service. Let's be people of cultural humility. Let's connect with human beings, learn, see how we can be of service to each other and help each other grow and become the best of who we're meant to be.
Truly said with the heart of a teacher. Thank you and thank everyone. We will see you next week.